Good evening. I'd like to call the budget workshop meeting for Thursday, March 8th, 2018 to order. We do have a bit of an agenda on this one, so item number one is public forum. Anybody wishing to address the Board of Finance in public forum?
We don't bite.
It's because there is no public forum. Anyway, item number two. Consider and take possible action on proposed fiscal year 2018-19 budget. I'm going to take a few minutes to explain some things that have happened over the recent, as we all know, 24 hours. And as the chairman of this particular board, I'm going to provide a little bit of summary of what's going on. It's been very crazy, as we all know, in this community, based on, I guess it's called Winter Storm Quinn, at least according to the Weather Channel. We had intended on workshop number one. We have usually two workshops. Tonight is workshop number one. We would have a second one on Monday. We were pretty much trying to get this workshop in, go through discussions, questions, deliberation, and move a budget forward. And obviously that changes over a period of time when, and I will take full credit for this, I was on the western side of Connecticut where there's light and power and heat, and that wasn't so much the case here in Guilford. I did not know that until my colleagues on this board said, "Are we really having a meeting?" And I had no idea what was going on here. I knew that I had been in communication with our first selectman. I had been in communication with a couple of people at home, but I didn't realize the gravity of having 50% at one point, I think even mid-afternoon, of residents without power. In talking with my colleagues on the Board of Finance and thinking about this a little bit, I felt it was not really prudent to be having any kind of deliberations or discussions on a budget when you may not even have a lot of people, if any people from the public and the community, to be able to state their case or hear the deliberations. We understand that these are taped meetings, but also it's very important to have physical presence. And it was a very last-minute call. At about 5 o'clock this afternoon, I was going back and forth and finally made the decision, which ultimately is my decision on whether we hold a meeting or not. So I was able to get the entire board here at this meeting. I know I had reached out to numerous people that are in the audience that are, whether they're department heads, town staff, Board of Education members. I'm looking around, and a lot of people who crafted these budgets are here, but also I understand that there's not very many public community members here because they're dealing with their own issues. That said, I decided to hold the meeting, but we are not going to make any decisions or any move any budgets forward until we know that we can get a good turnout of the public and give that opportunity. So tonight, and I take full responsibility for that. It's amazing what power and heat and light will do. You kind of think that you're okay, and then all of a sudden you hear that your community is not. And I didn't think it was fair to move forward with any deliberations, although this was already a meeting that was scheduled, and for anybody who, and I see there are people that have turned out, I didn't want anyone to be here and not have a meeting, and I know that we may have some questions. I wanted to give that opportunity for our board. There are a few things, I think, loose ends that we may want to ask, and then we'll try to make this somewhat of a short meeting, and depending on the number of questions that the board has. We do have several members that are here. I would be remiss in not mentioning a few things based on the circumstances in the last 24 hours, and I very quickly jotted them down. And of course, I'm going to forget many people and departments, but I want to seriously thank the Community Center and the Park and Rec and their staff for having this building open and putting the power on for us. No, I know that was Eversource, but setting everything up for us this evening, having their staff here, and I know that they are actually a warming center tonight, so appreciate that. The first responders, of course, who are out all night, fire, police, emergency, that were again, they were out all night and ready to respond as needed. Of course, Public Works, I know they have had a very long night, and I'm sure they're not sleeping yet. There's still a lot of work to be done, but a huge thank you to the Public Works Department, and of course the Selectman's office and the First Selectman. I know I've been in touch with him. I know he's posted. You know, there always comes to be that first event, you know, the first weather event, and you've gotten like 2 or 3 in your first couple months. So congratulations on that, and thank you for all your leadership. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to questions from the Board of Finance. I know we have members of the Board of Education. Our superintendent is here. Our Board of Education, the school's finance director is here. First Selectman Hoey is here. Mary Jane Malvezzi is here. So we do have people that are here to ask and have questions answered. So with that, I'm going to open it up. And any questions or concerns you'd like to bring up tonight? Okay, this could be a really short meeting.
Well, I'll start.
Veronica.
I had a question on the bonding for the Jones and Baldwin heating and air conditioning units. It's just really, I wanted to get a sense for the public to understand, but about how many times has the heat and air, have you had issues with heat and air in those buildings?
Thank you for the question. We mentioned Tuesday both of those heating ventilation systems are original. They were both original with the building's construction. Last winter, we had significant difficulties with the Baldwin system. It was down for nearly a week. We had students coming to school in their coats. The Baldwin system was down again earlier this winter during that excessive cold snap, and the same took place at Jones. That was down again this winter, but essentially they have both been going in and out of failure for most of the last 2 years. It's not always the whole system. It is sometimes just rooms at the end of the run where we have difficulty getting heat all the way to the end of a long hallway, but both of them are to the point that they are essentially continually failing at this point, and they're under constant repair and maintenance just to keep them up and running.
It's my understanding that parts are very difficult to get for
Yes.
these because of the age of the equipment. Is
Exactly
that true?
right. Yes, it's very difficult and becoming more expensive just to get the replacement parts because of the age of the systems themselves.
Thank you.
Well,
Ken, go.
while Paul is there, this is a question I always ask, which is if we, in our supposed wisdom, requested additional cuts from you, what areas could you cut?
Ultimately, and the board is well aware, that would be a conversation and a decision that only the Board of Education would make. But if we needed to look at making reductions in this budget, the way that I would advise the board would be to first look at pieces that are new. And so there are some elements in this budget. There is some significant monies that are allocated towards the purchase of new bleachers. Those bleachers are scheduled to be placed along the new turf field, the upper field on New England Road. That is something that we would be able to push back. We would look at the 2 new music positions. Now, you heard Tuesday night that there is support for those positions, but those are something new. We are currently below the state average in music offering. It's not a place where I like to be, but it's an area that I would, of course, direct the board to take a look. The board, I am sure, would also ask about retirement savings. At this time, we do not have any definitive retirement savings, but we could project that there would be possible savings from retirements that have yet to be announced. And we have contacted our insurance consultant and asked if there is any further projected savings that we could count on in medical savings based on the most recent numbers that have come in. At this time, he's not optimistic about that, but those would be areas that I know the Board of Education would ask questions, and I'd advise the board to look at those areas.
Thank you.
Can we maybe keep going along the
What?
BOE
I was going to
question?
suggest that.
All right, I've got one for you.
Sure.
So, question is about purchase services, athletic transportation. And I've actually been asking some questions because it caught my attention because it was a 29% increase, pretty large increase, about $33,000. And I did get some answers from Chairman Bloss, who's not here at the moment, but his answer kind of only gave me a partial part of the puzzle. So the increase is about $33,000. He said that about $2,000 moved from Adams' transportation line into this line. I was kind of wondering if there was an equal decline in that other Adams transportation line. And then he said there was a 20% increase in transportation generally, which is pretty much related, I think, to our new busing contract.
Right, so the busing contract has increased in general, and we know that any bus services have an increase in cost. But was there also some accounting correct?
Yes, we moved funds that were previously budgeted under the travel line for Adams, about $2,000 over. And then because of the bus increase, we increased it up to the level that it is in the...
Okay, so those pieces and the explanations make perfect sense. But I look at a 20% increase for the overall transportation cost and then the $2,000 from Adams, and we still come up with about $11,000, more or so. $11,000.
The athletics department did request an increase to their budget because of the number of athletic trips that they take. They were short last couple of years, and they were funding it out of their gate receipts. So they did request an increase, and we had given them a little bit of an increase for the athletic transportation.
So you see increased trips, you see the transfer out of the Adams line, and then you see the 20% increase on the contract
Okay,
itself.
so part of it may have been not on the spot budgeting last year, running a little over.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. In most of our athletic lines, we will annually come up short, whether it's on the officials, whether it's on safety and security at events, and any time that we come up short, then that shortfall is made up out of gate receipts. Every year, Mr. Jarvis comes forward and looks to increase the operating budget in most of those areas, and every year he gets less than he asks for as we rely on gate receipts. But this year we did honor a request to increase the number of trips, and that's part of what you see in the travel line, or in the transportation line.
Okay. Do you want to take some turns, or you want to
Yeah,
just keep going?
actually, I'm going to take a shot.
While we're here?
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you. I know that there were discussions during our subcommittee meetings regarding negotiations with the teachers and that contract being settled. I'm wondering, could you discuss a little bit, within reason, of course, what's the overall increase on the salaries that were agreed upon on the teachers' side? Is that
Approximately 3% per year.
Approximately
And again, it's important to note that 3% per year includes step increment for teachers who are young and moving or new to Guilford and moving through the experience steps. There are 11 or 14 steps built into the salary. For teachers who are at max, they are receiving something around a 1% raise. So for teachers who have made it to the top level of salary, they don't receive anything close to the 3%. But when you include step movement into that, it's about 3% per year.
And that's why I asked the question, partly so you could explain the step and how that works.
Yep. So teachers, it takes 11 or 14 years for a teacher to make the full salary of teachers in the school district. They work their way up towards that salary.
So the teachers that are newer will receive the bulk of that increase, but then as you move up the steps, then it gets less and less and less.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, if you're ready, go ahead.
Got no shortage. Got a few questions left. This question goes back to the movement towards using in-house services, which has been a very good positive for the town and working towards some efficiencies there. But I came across a line item for purchase services, special services. We spend about we're planning to spend about $885,000 on these services. They're described as consultations, evaluations, physical therapy. And the increase was pretty notable, a 21% increase at about $153,000 more.
Correct.
So the question is, can we look at this particular spending and also find some kind of relief by hiring in-house?
Yes, in fact, members of the Board of Education pushed us on that item earlier this year. So what we look for is we look to find the right balance between flexibility and being able to meet the needs of small numbers of students with contracted services, so that when the need is met, we don't have somebody who is on salary who then later needs to be laid off. So at some point, you want to work with contractors who can come in, work to meet the needs of 3 or 4 students, work partial weeks, just do a few evaluations. When it reaches a certain tipping point and we're now using that person to a level that it would be less expensive to hire in, the last evaluation is that a short-term need that's going to go away in a year or two, or is it actually going to be a sustained need? So we do look at that annually. There's actually 1 or 2 specific contracts that Mrs. Brown and I are specifically looking at and asking exactly that question. Is it time to hire a school district employee to meet those needs, or does it continue to be more efficient to use those outside contracts? I've asked her for an analysis of 2 contracts specifically asking that question. We will continue to see that line move up incrementally as we continue to keep greater numbers of students with more challenging needs in district, but it will never be as high as the full cost of outplacing those students and paying tuition for those students. So it's a necessary cost in order to gain the benefit of keeping those students in-house. But yes, we look at that carefully. When we reach that tipping point, we will hire in district rather than contract out.
Okay, sounds like you're well aware of this.
It's a good question, and we try to be proactive with it.
And that analysis that's done is to determine whether it makes sense to keep the student in district or to outplace them. I mean, the testing or the special services are done in part to make that determination.
No. Let me be. I was talking about the analysis of whether it is fiscally better to contract services out or to create a new position and hire a person in and own the position as part of our salary line. The analysis of whether a child receives services here in town or is outplaced is only made by the PPT team, the planning and placement team, and at times we will contract out for evaluations, and those evaluations do inform the PPT decision. We have professionals in-house who can conduct certain types of evaluations, but at times we need something that is very specialized, and we might contract out with a professional or somebody from Yale. But I do want to make sure we separate. There's never a financial decision about whether it's best to keep a child in district or not. It is simply an educational decision, and if we determine it is in the child's best interest that we educate the child here in Guilford, it's then our responsibility under a free and an appropriate education that we do so regardless of the cost. We never make a placement decision based on finances.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. It's an important clarification.
Is the board entirely comfortable with a 14% reduction in tuition?
We believe, and I know that you ask this question every year, we believe that right now, and that reduction has to do again with the fact that we've got a number of students that are aging out or graduating out this year and fewer younger students coming up behind to fill those outplaced slots. So we spent a lot of time working on that number. We are confident that that is the best number at this time, but I cannot project whether or not new students will move to town or students currently here will develop new needs over the course of the year. I can only remind you, and you're well aware from our experience, that when that happens, we expect to meet those needs in our existing budget. I will remind the board that as we have worked harder with projecting forward things like retirement savings, a big miss in special ed will make it more likely that the Board of Ed might have to at some time come before this board and ask for a special appropriation. But we have no plans to do that. It's not the way we plan on doing work. It's just a caution that I, over the last several years, have wanted to note with this board.
One question regarding that. I asked you the other night about residential placements,
yes.
And we didn't want it's a relatively small absolute number, so we didn't go into it. But last year, we budgeted for X, and we ended up with almost 3X in terms of residential. So if the aging out is primarily due to residential, it means it's a very small number of people. And if we were off by so much last year, then by definition, we probably don't have a lot of confidence. There's no way you can guess that number. So it's a two-pronged question. I'm assuming that a lot of it is due to the residential side of things.
In our office, when we plan for those costs next year, we're planning on real students that we know specifically. And so we are planning for the individuals and for the specific schools, locations where we know they will be placed. What we can't do is carry a big buffer for unanticipated costs moving forward. So what I can tell you is that we have taken the actual enrollment, rolled it forward for a year, and planned on the real enrollments that we anticipate for next year, whether they are day or residential enrollments.
Is there a cutoff for when somebody requiring residential placement comes into the district? Can they be placed at any time?
There is no cutoff. They would be placed at any time based on need.
Okay.
Yep, you cannot say to a family that, well, you moved in January and we won't provide service until September. No, we meet the needs for any resident at any time.
Okay. Moving on, so busing is something that, I've been bringing up with you and Mr. Bloss. There are two sides to the busing issue. One has to do with the delayed school start time, and one has to do with the cost. And these are just regular school busing I'm talking about. And I believe the number went from 1.8, it went out to bid. You had two bids. One was 2.1-ish and one was 2.3-ish. Initially, you were looking at the STA, which is our historic vendor, at 2.3, and you've chosen to go with the lower bid of 2.1. I asked at our joint meeting the feasibility of purchasing our own buses and doing it ourselves. We'd need about 34 buses. I was told it wasn't viable at that meeting. To me, to determine whether something's viable, I like to see the numbers. There can be a number of components, but numbers are one of the criteria. Thus far, I haven't seen those numbers. I mentioned it to Mr. Bloss, and he sent me some data that is 11 years old based on a study that was done 11 years ago. I called, as you know, a number of people and put together a spreadsheet. And I don't know whether I think it may be viable, as I've indicated, and I think it could certainly, there are some issues regarding liability. There are a number of components to it, sure. A couple of which, but the reality is the price of a new school bus hasn't changed materially since the last study was done 11 years ago, but our busing costs have more than doubled since then. I think we were, basically doubled. We were around 1.1, I believe, back in when Andy, I don't know.
Mr. Potocny?
Yes, that. When he did the study, and it was in 2007. So I would love to see that done. But in addition, one of the things I've gleaned is we have 3 bus runs now. We have 25 bus runs for the high school, 30 for the middle schools, and 30 for the elementary schools. By definition, based on the 3,300 students we have, a lot of those buses are nowhere near full capacity.
Right.
I would also love to see somebody do a study of if we did 2 runs and did K through 6 and did and had a 1 start time there and did another run of 7 through 12. Yep. By definition, there's a lot of overlap. Yes, the buses would be more full, and but again, using 30 buses, I still believe, again, assuming a somewhat symmetrical distribution of populace. I believe that with the same 30 buses, you could pick up all the students in town, and therein have your high school start at 8 or 8:15, along with your Adams, and have Baldwin and the elementary school start at the later time. So again, thus far, I haven't seen numbers on the true costs of doing the buses ourselves, and I recognize New York State has a law where buses can't be more than 10 years old due to corrosion. I assume Connecticut has a similar type situation, so the life of your bus is maximum of 10 years. And I think in my spreadsheet I used 8 years for the life of a bus, but I'd love to see somebody do that because I think we could perhaps save money, and B, we could address the later school start time without having to incur the additional number I keep hearing is $500,000 to $700,000 extra for that.
Okay. So there's a lot there. So first, I want to be really clear. When you began, you mentioned that there's two pieces around the bus increase, changing start times and the contract increase. I want to be really clear. There are no dollars in this existing budget for any change in start time. Right. So nothing that is associated with that bus increase is related to any planned change about start times. And so while there are serious considerations and possible plans out there for something as early as this September, there are no dollars associated. None of the transportation increase is related to any change in school schedules. We did do, the district conducted a study of school bus costs some 10 years ago. We have not replicated that study now. What I know is that we do not have the infrastructure to begin taking on something that is that far afield from our core mission. What we have tried to focus on in the Board of Education is to make sure that we are investing and focusing on education, on teaching and learning, and we've done really well with that. And the idea of taking ancillary services that we could contract out to specialists at reasonable cost and not have to take on the oversight, the management, and the supervision of those is something that is really important to me structurally. That the leadership of the school district is focused on teaching and learning rather than creating positions that would oversee the maintenance, the mechanics, the hiring of an entire new we'd have to hire on all of those bus drivers who currently are not employees. And so there's the cost, but there's also the drain on the infrastructure that I worry about as well. I do know that across the state, there are no municipalities that are moving to take ownership of buses into their communities. My colleagues, my look at all of the other communities around the state are looking to farm out those sorts of components. So no, we haven't done that kind of deep dive study that was done some 10 years ago to look at the idea of hiring that on or not. The idea of looking at two bus runs we did look at. We did look at a two-tier bus run very seriously 3 or 4 years ago. It was done in part as we were exploring the changing of start times. And 3 or 4 years ago, I thought it was going to be a great idea to change to 2 bus runs. We brought in an outside organization. We brought in the District Management Council at the time. We asked for their help looking at that scenario as well as some other scenarios. And while that scenario might not have been the most expensive, it may not have reached the level of $500,000 or more, as some would, it did have a price tag of something north of $250,000 to do the 2 bus runs. In addition to that, it would also lengthen the bus runs. You're exactly right when you say that we have 3 tiers. In really round numbers, we've got 3,300 students in the district, and we have enough buses to move 1,100 of those students at any one time. So we do a high school, then a middle school, and then an elementary bus run. Our bus runs are not limited by the number of students we get on the buses. Our runs in Guilford are limited by run time. We are the 3rd largest community geographically in the state of Connecticut. If we tried to run our buses and load them to capacity, therefore needing fewer buses to complete the runs, we would jump from somewhere like a 40 or 45-minute bus run to well over an hour, maybe approaching 80 minutes. The idea of having students on buses for 80 minutes every morning and every afternoon, I believe is untenable. We made some changes over the last 2 years to try to generate more bus efficiencies by extending some of our runs and by expecting families or students to walk further from their homes. We made approximately 150 adjustments, and we received 90 appeals to roll those back. Part of what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're providing a service that is fiscally responsible, but also a service that meets the needs of the families in the community. And the idea of pushing our bus runs to capacity so that we could be more efficient, but putting kids on a bus for that length of time every day goes into that calculation. So no, we didn't redo that study. We put the contract back out to bid based on administrative capacity, based on what we saw around the other existing communities, and based on a recognition that it was a reasonable cost and we had no reason to expect that we'd be able to do it cheaper in-house. We didn't see a need to restudy it. I understand that the study is some 10 years old now, but we didn't see a need to redo that study at this time.
So a couple of comments. Thank you. One, I never suggested that it would be your responsibility to take care of the maintenance of the buses or the hiring of the bus drivers, and I did factor in the need for additional personnel and maybe a department or who knows who runs it. So I'm not suggesting that it should detract in any way from the education quality that the students are getting. Two, with regard to lengthening of bus runs, while I agree that doubling the number of people on a bus will take longer by definition to get those people on and off the bus, these buses, we're not talking about new streets. The buses are already going by all of the houses and all of the cul-de-sacs that these people live on. So, and you're already moving toward cluster stops. So all we're talking about when we go to 2 runs is picking up more people at each stop primarily. We're not talking about significantly more stops. Now, your DMC run will show that, and again, that's the type of material that I'd love to see, and I would suggest we should do it again. And I also think that again, I think you could go to 2 runs, and I think you could probably do it for 2. I think the bus company is clearly making money, so I think you can do it for less than $2 million. We're paying 2.1 now, and I think if we had to do it ourselves, we could do it for less than $2 million, and that would include delayed start time for the high school. Would that be a headache for you? Yes. Am I suggesting that it should be your responsibility? Not in any way, but I do think that somebody should bring the numbers up to speed and do the analysis, and I've tried to do it and I've gotten some pushback, and it's not really my job to do that anyway, nor do I have the software that you have access to.
So respectfully, everything is my responsibility. Anything that is brought into the school district is ultimately going to land on my desk. Whether we create administrative positions within the chain of command to meet that responsibility is then going to add to the cost. And respectfully, I would note, we have talked about start times and busing more than just about any other topic in this community and in this school system over the last 3 years. I would suggest that if there were a savings and a way to move the start time later, it would have been found by now. We have been working on this problem for the last 3 or 4 years. We have talked to every other community in the state who is looking to move their start times later. Nobody has found a way to move the start times later and do it at a savings. It is simply, the Rand Corporation looked at it nationally, and the dollar figure that they attach to it is $150 per student. That if you want to move a high school start time somewhere 30 to 60 minutes later than it currently is, you should assume off the top a dollar value of $150 per student. I would suggest that the Rand Corporation knows what they're looking at. They know what they're talking about. So I understand, I appreciate the comment, but at this point, we have entered into a contract, we have awarded the bid, and we did not do the study to the level that you've asked.
So how does one like myself get the bus stop analysis, that software that's out there?
So
is that DMC? What is that? Because you've mentioned it before about when you talk about cluster stops, that they can, based on where the kids are, you know exactly what it is. I want to know why it costs more to run 2 lines. I want to know specifically why the numbers don't work.
So the DMC study is available on our website. That is a study that we've shared with the public from the day that we received it. That's available on our website, and I would be happy to meet with you. The software that we run and the information that is loaded in that software, which includes student addresses and bus stops, isn't anything that we share publicly for lots of reasons. Right. But I'd be happy to meet with you and have that conversation.
Okay.
Just a small follow-up question. Dr. Freeman, you think you just pick up all the students on your way in?
I've got a minivan. I'm happy to do that, Jonathan.
All right, just as a backup plan. All right, should we keep...
I have, actually I have one question. Does anybody, it's a fairly small one. Has to do with the high school. There were two items, one having to do, and again, I think I know the answers to these, but I think anyone looking at this might be questioning as well. Let me just make sure I get the two numbers here. Telephone. Guilford High School goes up about $5,000, but all the rest of them stay the same, and I'm wondering, first question is why the high school alone went up on the telephone. And again, it's not that much, but that's question one.
Question one.
Question two is on building maintenance. There was about a $45,000 increase on building maintenance. Actually, that's not necessarily, it is on the high school. The reason is because there's a note here that says HVAC at the GHS requires additional maintenance. I know the systems there are much more modern and complicated, bless you. But I'm just wondering if those could be, that's $50,000 right there, and it's more dedicated to the high school. I'm just wondering if you could answer
I'm going to ask Linda for confirmation, but I believe that the communication line at the high school is more about internet and the loss of certain E-rate funding that we had previously received. The contracts at the high school are that you're exactly right. We've got more complex systems. We are attempting to enter into preventative maintenance contracts so that we don't end up with systems that are 30 years old and that we need to continue Band-Aid moving forward. But I'm going to ask Linda to confirm both of those.
Yes, the telephone at the high school is due to the internet, which used to be provided by the state, and the state no longer provides internet access to the high school. We now have to pay for it. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That explains that one.
Now you have a phone up there.
Absolutely.
All right. I understand, too, that some of the difference in the telephone costs of the high school are because some administrators get cell phone reimbursements of about $50. And I was wondering how many get the $50 reimbursements, and then, why?
Principals and leadership team members receive a reimbursement, or they can have a district phone. And then there are a number of members of the maintenance, custodial, and facility staff who have district-issued phones. This weekend is the best example of it. We are on the phone constantly with our principals, and so principals who are expected to respond to my phone calls, texts, or emails 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, have the ability to receive a reimbursement for the phone that they use to conduct that business on. Otherwise, I couldn't require that they be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we were on the phone last night at 11 o'clock. We were on the phone this morning at 5:30 in the morning. So we do allow them a $50 reimbursement per month for a cell phone if it's used for business reasons, for work responsibilities.
Okay. So we're going to keep going with the school, or maybe take a break?
Anybody else have?
The town is
No,
too.
no breaks. There's no breaks tonight. No breaks. No breaks tonight. If I could I just want to note that Mr. Beatty had to go to a couple of, he had a prior thing that he's coming back for. I just didn't want anyone to think that he was leaving, and for any other purpose than he had another commitment that he will be back for. So I just wanted to make sure it was noted. Go ahead.
The technology lease.
Mm-hmm.
In years past, and I think the public perception is that it was there to provide Chromebooks so that we could have a Chromebook for every student, basically. And I know there are a number of people that have come forward and questioned whether or not, I think at a recent Board of Ed meeting, it was brought up that perhaps the kids were spending too much time with their Chromebooks. I happen to know from multiple sources that they're also used for game playing. But in this technology lease this year, which is $500,000 a year, and again, and I've asked the question before, because Chromebooks you can get them for less than $200 now, so you could outfit the whole school pretty quickly, and it appears as if we have, because in this year, $270,000 of the $500,000 is allocated for staff laptops. And so I guess the question is, of course you're going to tell me that it's absolutely necessary. I get it. But I would argue, we all got these iPads, and I don't think those were necessary, and that pales in comparison. These were $3,000 or $4,000. But don't a lot of the staff already have their own? Most people have a laptop. And you can use your laptop, and more often than not when you're using your laptop, you're logging into a central site. You're not using it specifically for one thing. So I guess the question is, do we really have to spend $270,000 out of the 500 on staff laptops?
So you were right. The quick answer is yes, but I also want to point out that it's also a good question, and it is one that we pushed hard on this year. We looked very hard to see if we could begin moving our staff members to the less expensive Chromebooks, because you're right, it is a vehicle to log into the cloud where much of the information is stored. There are about 3 essential activities, however, that we require of our teachers that right now do not have cloud access. And so one of them is the electronic gradebook. And so we have shifted to a gradebook where teachers enter their grades in and parents have the ability, students have the ability to enter into that electronic gradebook. That software suite requires a laptop with a hard drive. We are not yet able to move on to a Chromebook to complete that function. I believe that there are requirements that the staff do through our student management data system, PowerSchool, that right now still require them to have a fully functioning laptop. Will we be able in future years to transition staff members off of an individual laptop and onto a Chromebook or a tablet or a different type of device? Yes, and we pushed hard on that, but we're not ready to do it in this iteration.
So how are they doing it now if they don't have a laptop now?
They have a laptop now. What we're looking at is a replacement cycle. So we replace the laptops for about 1/3 of the teachers on roughly a 5-year cycle. And so we've got teachers who are working on 5-year-old laptops that we are looking to update. When Mr. Mitchell came to the district and when we first entered into the technology lease system that we are in now, we had no such system. We would go out and buy a bunch of technology, and then 7, 8, or 10 years later, it would all be outdated, it would all be failing, and we would have to make an enormous investment to replace huge chunks all at once. What we do now with a rolling series of leases is we are always trying to stay ahead of that curve so that as new instructional materials come out, as new expectations come out, when we decided that we were going to shift all of our classroom teachers to an expectation that they have an asynchronous digital component to their classroom, which we've done through Google Classroom, we didn't then find out that we didn't have technology that was able to do that. We had machines that were new enough and sophisticated enough and had enough memory that we could make that expectation, and the teachers were able to meet that expectation. If we had simply bought Chromebooks or bought computers 10 years ago, we wouldn't be able to make that kind of move without then replacing all of the teachers' laptops in 1 year or all of the classroom computers all at the same time. And that also speaks to the same reason that we don't expect our teachers, when we hire them, to come in with a laptop. We know that the machines that we issue can meet the needs of everything that we expect the teachers to be able to accomplish in their classroom. We also can require the teachers to enter into an appropriate use contract with us, so we have some accountability, we have some ability to monitor, we have some ability to control, and we know that they can meet our expectations when those machines belong to the organization, not to the individual who fills the position.
Have you got a schedule that shows, historically?
Mr. Mitchell does, yeah.
So we can get a copy of that, of what the technology lease looks like, when they roll off and when the new ones come on?
Yep.
Okay.
I think I got a related question, and this speaks to really kind of the other portion of the technology lease, which is to buy the Chromebooks for the students.
Yep.
And I think I'm starting to get very concerned about the town and the schools getting engrossed into technology and whether they have the flexibility to use technology that's not specific to a specific device. And, I've questioned previous budget meetings, is it really necessary to provide a Chromebook for every single student when so many students already have a device and they could easily opt out and say, geez, I've got a laptop, I know how to use it, it's set up the way I like it, I do my work on the machine anyway. So, I feel similar that, by choosing the right kind of flexibility and technology, that there's potential savings. I think even half the students might opt out of the Chromebook. And I think it also speaks to the groups that are a little concerned about electronics for children and whether they have an internet nanny and some of the things they might apply limit use and get students moving around instead of focusing too much on media. So I got, similar concerns about that lease, and I'm wondering if you can at least consider something more flexible and some kind of policy where students could opt out and you don't have to provide a device for every student.
So I appreciate the reminder. I didn't respond to the parent concern. Yes, there were some concerns voiced this year about the amount of time that students are spending on technology, and there was a sort of grassroots parent group that has come out to a couple of Board of Education meetings. And the way that we addressed that with the parent group, and I think the parent group was incredibly responsive to this, is that we acknowledge that we share essentially every single one of their concerns. But from an educational organization, the way to address those concerns is not to simply avoid them. We will do our students no favors if we take technology out of the classrooms, out of the schools, and expect them not to engage with technology at home. We need to expect that they're going to engage with technology. We need to give them assignments and activities and tasks that require them to dive into that, and then we have to help them to understand the responsibilities, the risks that come with that technology. And quite honestly, our kids are going to be a lot better at this than we are right now. We're trying to figure this out for them. I struggle with my teenage boys and how much time they have and what kind of access they have. And I know that they're going to be better parents digitally to my grandkids than I'm capable of being to them right now. They're going to have a better handle on what this means. So one, while we have concerns around time spent on the items, we're not going to run away from those concerns. What we expect to do is to address them. And so one is we're continuing to work with better software limitations. So we do have certain nannies or controls that are on the books that go home now, and we're pushing the vendors to provide us with greater control. For instance, we want to be able to find a software that allows parents to schedule in a bedtime, and so that a parent can program your device to go dark at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. or at whatever time you decide is appropriate for your child and your family. We're also working with that grassroots parent group, and we're continuing to do a series of informational educational components. We just recently screened screenagers in our community. So we want to continue to engage in conversations with our students. We just came off of a series of assemblies at Adams Middle School where we met with the students and talked about internet safety and how to behave appropriately on those devices. So it's our job to use the devices, leverage the devices, and educate kids and parents. One of the really important learning pieces for us, when that parent group came out and spoke to us, we recognized that when we sent the Chromebook home for the first time, that most of the literature we sent home talked about how much it cost and how you as a parent could buy insurance on it. And we didn't talk enough about how to speak with your child, control the device, and set appropriate limitations around the use of the device for you in your home. And so we're changing the way that we approach that. We also learned, Jonathan, and you used the word necessary, so I'll be careful. No, I'm not going to stand here and say it's absolutely necessary that we provide one Chromebook to each student. And in fact, before Chromebooks became available and we were looking at full-blown laptops, we were really exploring a bring your own device policy where students would be able to bring any device from home and work on that device. What we were learning was the challenges of that policy. Some students are working from a phone. Some students are working from a tablet. Some students are working from a new laptop, and some are working from a laptop that's 10 or 15 years old and looks like a phone book and doesn't have enough memory to do spell check on it, let alone the kinds of activities that we want to do. We have learned that by moving to a consistent platform, students can log into their Chromebook once in the morning, and they don't have to log in every time they go from one class to another. So we're saving instructional time by having them work from a common device. We're saving maintenance time, and we're saving, I think, personnel time, because not only do we know how to work on the laptops because we have one standard platform, but if yours goes down, we can take it away from you and give you a new one, rather than if it was your personally owned computer and it went down in the middle of a lesson, we would have a tech who was trying to work on your computer. And quite honestly, we've become really uncomfortable doing that, because if you're bringing mom or dad's computer to school to use in class, I don't want my tech digging around in that hard drive. That's going to create problems for everybody. If we own the device and it goes down, we pull it, we give you another one out of our inventory, you don't lose any instructional time, and we can either get it warranted or fixed at another time without interrupting instruction or pulling a tech off of some other more important piece. So it's not necessary, but when a Chromebook now costs about as much as an AP physics book, we decided that it was more efficient to do it that way. When it was an $1,800 laptop, wasn't the direction that we were going, but Chromebooks changed the game for us.
And just a couple of points you hit on, though. By no means would I ever expect the school to start servicing someone's private computer. Obviously, if a student's computer failed, you would just say, "Hey, here's a Chromebook."
Okay,
End of story.
yeah.
End of story.
But
And then I understand they are.
But all the work is on that computer, right?
True,
all the
true.
work is, so you inevitably we ended up getting hung up in situations where the student says, I know my paper's on this computer,
Yep.
I can't access it on the Chromebook, and so a well-meaning teacher or technician starts grabbing that computer to help the kid. And we avoid all of that by shifting to our common platform.
Definitely more legitimate than the dog ate my homework, and you might even want to let him off that day if his laptop fails. That would be up to policy, right? But I know that the cost of the Chromebooks are relatively reasonable, but when you're talking about such large numbers, I mean, I think the Chromebooks for all students are somewhere near 200,000, or so 50% would be $100,000 savings. That would be very nice.
So here's where what I would want to do is remind you about some slides that Mr. Bloss showed and go to the bottom line. So remember, we're performing in the top 5 school districts in the state, but we're investing at the 78th place overall. So I would argue that the results that we are getting, to a degree, go right to answering the question. Yes, I understand all the points that you're making, but when the teachers are telling us that there's no lost time, we don't have to excuse a kid because the computer ate the homework today, because the Chromebook is giving us the ability to access that. And we're doing it for $3,000 per student less than the only districts in the state that are outperforming us. Right? At some point, when do we look at return on the investment that we're making? And I think we're getting that return. We're seeing that those machines in the classroom are having an impact on the learning and the success that the students are recognizing.
And to your point, I think I want to remind anybody who's watching that these are some excellent budgets. We're getting excellent results in our school. And, when this board sits here and sometimes asks if we can eke out some more savings, it's part of the job, and we ask the questions, but we definitely are impressed with the cost of the Guilford school system compared to its ranking and some of the things you had in your presentation earlier.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be combative, but that's where I would recommend that the board, when the Board of Ed takes up any reductions, that's why technology didn't appear on that short list that I responded in, because I think that we're seeing real value out of those technology investments. Do we need to look at retirement savings or the bleacher purchase or even the expansion of music this year? Possibly. If this board makes a reduction, then the Board of Ed is going to have to address those areas. But I would be really hesitant to begin looking at that investment in technology because I think it's having real results for our kids.
Okay. Thank you. One request?
Yep.
There was a request, I think, yesterday that I had just sent out for the presentation that you just referred to get to the Board of Education. Board of Finance. I didn't see it. I don't know if it came
over late tonight.
It did come over.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
Okay, so we have it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as far as the community is concerned, all those slides are available on our website as well if people want to see those slides as well.
Great. Thank you.
Now, if we keep asking our superintendent questions, maybe we should offer him a chair, or?
Well, I was gonna give him a break.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going anywhere. I'll be happy to come back later.
Yeah, and bring the town up. So
I did not get a copy of that late tonight. I got, from the Board of Ed, I got from Terry, I got the agenda documents.
I will make sure that
I did not get the presentation.
I'll make sure that the PowerPoint goes out again tomorrow to all members of the Board of Finance. Yep.
thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
I have a question really directed to both. It's regarding pensions. So it's both Board of Ed and the town side. I may be wrong, I'm under the impression that the Board of Ed side is still a little underfunded. We're kicking in an additional 400 and change on the town side due to changes in actuarial assumptions, primarily with regard to the police, I think it is. My question to both of you is, have we considered, I'm of the opinion, and it's just an opinion, but everybody's entitled to their own opinion, that over the past 6 years, pick a number, we've systematically overtaxed people. And whether, again, that implies it was deliberate. I believe it was. Whether or not it was doesn't really matter. But we've shored up the rainy day fund over that same time period. My question is, and really my comment is, if the pension is underfunded and we are not funding it in a past given year, but we are running a surplus that we put in the rainy day fund, taxpayers have put money into the town. Is it not fair to instead of running the surplus, you didn't really have a surplus if you'd put the money perhaps where it should have gone, which is to the pensions. So had we allocated that money to pensions, then the surpluses wouldn't have been as high as they are. So where I'm going with this is, in both sides, have we considered taking the money from some surplus funds that are currently available and getting the pensions up to levels where they belong, so that we're not encumbering people? Let's take the extreme, people that are moving into town and are new to the payroll. In other words, a lot of people have left town, they paid the taxes for monies that should have gone into those pensions. Why not take that money that has already been paid to the town, put it where it should have gone, arguably, and not tax, let's assume that we're all new to the town, which we're not, but not put that burden on us now going forward, because the money in theory has already been collected. So I don't think it's a big enough number that it would have a meaningful drain on the rainy day fund. I do think it's an event that occurred in the past that could have or should have been covered. Just a thought. You could do that and it would reduce the current year's tax. So I feel pretty strongly about it personally, but again, it hasn't been considered.
I'll speak to that. I think that's essentially what we've suggested.
Glad we had it. Ken, you raised an interesting point, one that we've already had several discussions on. In fact, there has been discussion between Paul, myself, and the chair of the Board of Education related to the underfunding or the ARC payment that is required to bring the Board of Education number to a more reasonable level, more consistent with the other plans. And we think that number is somewhere around $400,000. And it was, I think I've actually mentioned that at a couple of meetings, that it is my intention to recommend to you, and this would be a joint recommendation to the Board of Finance, because the Board of Finance actually has the control over those funds, to allocate a one-time opportunity to cover that ARC for the Board of Education and bring them up to that level. So
Which is
I
exactly
agree.
what you're describing.
Yeah, I
But that's
agree.
just one half. You're also doing it this year with on the town side with the police.
We
for
are
400.
because
So-
we haven't had those agreements, those levels. If that's something you want to entertain, certainly would be willing to
So
do
that would be
the question that, and maybe Mary Jane or Mitch can answer this, is our anticipated levels next year. Are they consistent with that the level that we have this year, or is that an ARC for us, or do we expect to see that go on for the foreseeable future at that level? Yes, please. Because if it's going to be at that foreseeable level for the near term, you've basically used a one-time revenue opportunity to reduce this year's budget, but next year you'd still have to get to that level.
Thanks, Matt. Mitch Goldblatt, Director of Human Resources. The question about next year, meaning a year from now, we really don't know, because it's going to depend on, our earnings. It's going to depend on a lot of other variables that go into the contracts, who retires. However, the question was being posed about the assumptions. We have lowered our assumption. All right, we've lowered the assumption, I believe, from 7% to 6.75, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Yeah. And by doing so, it has increased our ARC. All right, but that is following our actuaries' recommendations. So yes, we've increased the amount of money going into the pension next year because of that, but in the long run, that's going to help us get to that fully funded measure. It's going to take a while, but that's the way the actuaries figured out, because you only have to be 100% funded when 100% of the people retire. So you're not intended to be at 100% now. We are inching that way forward because this administration, past administration, and the boards of finance have recommended following that ARC, and I think it's been wise to do so.
So am I off base then in thinking that the change, even though it's a change in assumption, we are talking about fiscal year 18 versus 19. So we're in fiscal 18 now, which is coming to an end. And we know that right now, again, that based on the change in assumptions, and I think it's more than just the change in assumptions, is the 400 and change solely due to the drop? I don't think it is.
It's not solely based on that.
So my point is,
that's a good part of it, though.
The initial premise was that the liability that exists was created is a past event. It's over time. And so we're getting it up to speed. And my argument was and is that we've taken in the money to fund this, in essence, but we haven't done it. And it may be because our assumptions, but it could be for a variety of reasons. But prior taxpayers did, in theory, put money into our coffers that could have been used for this, but it now sits in another account.
And that's a decision that's got to be made here and there. But let me just fully answer some of the other points, and that is that there are other assumptions, not just the change of rates, that are amortized over time. So when there's a change, let's say to the police contract, which you have mentioned, it's not like we take it all on the chin in 1 year. The actuary will spread that out over either a 5-year or 10-year period, depending on what makes sense. So, so it eases the burden.
Understood.
And the same thing happens when things go well. It's smoothed out as well to make it as smooth for us as possible. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Now, can I ask for a little bit of clarification, because I think I've had a similar discussion with our first selectman about some of that undesignated reserve fund. How can we put that money to work for taxpayers in this operating budget? Is there a mechanism for that? Is that a question for our finance director?
Of course there is. We could take any amount of unassigned fund balance and apply it to offset increased expenditures. But you leave yourself in a very precarious place next year, because you now have to find that same revenue source to get back to the same level of revenue. So if you use $1 million of that fund balance, unassigned fund balance, to offset the spending increase or the tax increase, where do you get it next year? Do we have another $1 million? How long does that last? We've been down that path before. 30 to 40 years ago, the town started doing that because they had, every year they had a guaranteed or a built-in surplus. Not every year, but they started, it was pretty consistent. At one point, we were up to using about $1.4 million per year. That's at its highest to offset the budget. But there was an expectation that the previous year's budgets would, in fact, create those kind of surpluses. That came crashing down somewhere in 2009. No, it was earlier than that. Earlier than that. I believe it was when Carl Balistraci was first selectman. So, and his
it was
first
almost
term,
exhausted.
So.
I mean,
Right. So it's now your question is well placed. Are there opportunities to use that money for other purposes where we would not necessarily need to go tax people? I think you've heard me talk about the fact that as we go down the path of creating the task force for the Guilford Safe Streets Mobility Task Force, and we determine that there are places in this community where we need sidewalks that are consistent with the 2002 transportation plan or the plan that will be developed between now and the end of the year. I would see that as an opportunity to use those funds on behalf of the taxpayers.
But again, the only difference is, that's a subject for another day, I think. The only difference is that item specifically you just mentioned is forward-looking. I'm talking about costs that we've incurred that we know about that we didn't fund. That's the only, I think, immediate and obvious difference. So, it's a function of what is a rainy day event, basically. And what I'm suggesting is that the underfunding of the pensions on a historic basis is not a rainy day event. It's something that should have been done. It's all across the country, obviously. We're, as everybody knows, we're in good shape relative to most. But again, it's still a tax that we're putting on people for this year that I think perhaps could have been paid for earlier.
Well, I would suggest that what we're doing on the town side is exactly what you say we should be doing, which is to pay what we're supposed to every year. In fairness, the Board of Education has a gap. And we probably should have been putting more money towards that over the past few years. This is an opportunity to correct that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's tear the Band-Aid off. Let's use some of that unassigned fund balance and get it done, and then get to a point where we're contributing annually at the actuarial recommended levels, which the previous Board of Selectmen, Charlie, the only holdout, insisted on. And they insisted on it in front of this board for a number of years. So
this is, and I just want to
Yep.
add something. This is really the first time, maybe we started thinking about it last year, but this is really the first time we're having that discussion because we made a commitment many years ago to build that back up. The percentage on the unassigned fund balance was woefully low, as we know, years ago.
Right.
And so we made a commitment, we made a policy to build that. This is the first time we can actually start talking about should we or shouldn't we? Well, and you're indicating the pros and cons to that, but we knew it was going to at some point come if we got to a healthy balance, and now we're at a fairly healthy balance, but we have to be careful that we maintain that.
I agree with you. The previous administration did a terrific job of building back the fund balance. Mm-hmm. Joe and I had more than one or two discussions about what that level should be. And quite honestly, at almost 9%, is it 8.9 or it's over 9% now, sitting on the sideline, that's more than I'm really comfortable with. And I think there is an opportunity for us to do exactly what Ken has said, and I've actually asked for that over the previous years, but Joe was insistent on bringing it to, continuing to bring it up. Now,
I would add that the conversation was at the recommendation of our auditors.
Right.
Because every year they moved the dollar amount, right, or the percentage of our fund balance that they wanted. Right. And that goes to the S&P and the Moody's, right, and our bond ratings.
Absolutely.
And it was a moving target.
It was a
year.
wide range.
It's been a moving target for 26 years,
Yep.
27 years. I remember Bob Hartman sitting on this board saying 3 to 5%. That's what everybody tells us.
Yep.
All right.
Now,
and here's the reality. $9 million sitting on the sideline.
Yeah.
Pretty significant
Dollars.
Contingency fund. If it's anything, if it's even half of that or more, we're probably going to bond it.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. It would typically be for something that expensive or that big would most likely have an asset life that exceeds 5 or 10 years. That would probably be, we might be looking at, I don't know, you figure out what it might be. Could be a new school or wing to a school or
Land purchase.
Go ahead.
I'm really glad this is coming up in our workshop, and
right.
I think I want to share, some thoughts with the board and our first selectman, of course, our superintendent. And one is, though, I just want to say about intentionally building up this rainy day fund. This certainly was not done in darkness. This was done in the light of day. I mean, we made I have in front of me the town of Guilford's fund balance policy. We have intentionally tried to seek out a policy fund balance between, I need my glasses to tell you what our policy says, between 5 and 10% of the regular general fund operating revenues. So, this was done in the light of day. This was intentionally done because that fund had been depleted. Obviously, to Veronica's point, our AAA rating is related to some factors like how much reserve we have and so forth. So I think, though, we might agree that we've reached a point where it may be fully funded, so to speak. And I'm a big fan of looking at certain accounts that we have in special funds and say, hey, they're fully funded. Why don't we take the surplus and put it to use for the taxpayer instead of the money, getting some dust on it and maybe not earning the highest rates of return because we need safe investments for the town's money. Right. So I think there might be some agreement that we put it to work, but I think the important point would be that we come up with some kind of policy to say, once it reaches this level, it's not touchable. There's a minimum amount that we want in our rainy day fund, and we're not going to use that unless we have an emergency and we have a rainy day type of incident. Yeah. But if there's a surplus, I think it makes sense. Me personally, I like paying down debt or shoring up the pensions because I think it has a second payoff in terms of the interest we earn in the pension account or the interest we save by eliminating some principal on the bonding side. Right. So I'm wondering if our board here can find some agreement and maybe put some of this money to use for the taxpayers, because Ken's point is well made. The taxpayers have paid this money already. Why not put it to work?
I don't want my intent to be misconstrued here. I'm not in favor of using rainy day funds for non-rainy day events. What I'm saying is that we systematically overtax people in the past, which I'm not. I'm also of the impression that we are not allowed to tax knowing that money is going into a rainy day fund. That you're not allowed to tax people so that you can build up your rainy day fund. You can run surpluses, but you're not supposed to tax people so that you can increase your rainy day fund. And I'm not suggesting that we start using the rainy day fund money for this, that, and the other. What I am saying is that this particular item is something that we could have and should have paid for before, and we collected tax dollars to do it. And so what I would like to see is that we do it there. We can have this conversation. I don't know whether tonight's, we're already doing it, but whether or not something warrants being used, using rainy day fund money for, that's a case-by-case basis, and it all depends on who's sitting at what seat at any given time. But I'm not. If you do go back and look through the years that you've referred to, it was used regularly for all kinds of things. So I'm not saying that we or suggesting that we should embark all of a sudden and start to use this money. So this was for me, it was a one-off. I'm looking at the budget this year, and it's a one-off thing that I think we could have and should have paid for. So that's you can keep going on the other one, how we use the rainy day fund, but please don't misconstrue my intent.
I think this board would probably have an opportunity to set de facto policies when we make some recommendations as to what levels we think it should be at. I've already gone on record that I think the level that it was at prior to the most recent audit, which I think was Joe's last year, in the second to last year, was at 8.92%. Well, we wound up, as you all know from having read your audit, with about another almost $1.2 million in additional revenue or unexpended funds. And we only need about $250,000 of that 1.2. Am I close? Yeah. We only need about $250,000 of that 1.2 to keep us at the 8.92% level or whatever it is. So that affords us the opportunity to utilize some of those funds for, excuse me, for exactly what you're suggesting, Ken. And, okay.
I have another topic if we're ready to move away from.
Sure.
Historically, the golf course, Mr. Gammerman's favorite topic, has lost, I believe, between $30,000 and $50,000 a year.
Correct.
We brought in the professional last year. I haven't seen any, and we used to get monthly data, and it was sort of fun to look at. We haven't seen any data since we brought in the professional, so I don't know how many kids. It was billed as being something that was going to attract a lot of kids in town, and there were going to be a lot of programs that came out of it. Hopefully, that happened. What concerns me is that this budget shows revenue of $180,000. I think it's $181,000 for golf, with projected expenses at basically $100,000 more than that, $280,000. So we're budgeting now for a $100,000 loss, which is, I think, close to what it lost last year, which was the first year trial year. with the new program. I voiced concerns about the 30 to 50, but recognized that 30 to 50, a lot of people are using it, it's okay. I'm not loving the slippery slope to the point where we're now budgeting $100,000 loss. So I do, I think something needs to, we either need an explanation as to that the program was a home run or it wasn't. I know it's still in its nascent stages, perhaps. But I don't think budgeting $100,000 loss is the right approach.
I just wanted to mention, we have, now that the golf course is part of the operating budget, we have been receiving monthly information on the golf course, on revenues and on expenditures. We used to get it separately.
We used to get all the rounds played and the cost per round, and we got a lot of detail that we're not getting.
It used to be much more detailed, yes. But now we're getting it.
It's in the
right.
The sheet.
I just didn't want anyone to think that we're not getting any information on the golf course. We are.
We're not getting the same
as
information.
detailed. Right.
It's just not separate.
Right.
Go ahead, Matt.
I think the decision was made, and Mr. Gammerman and I had many discussions about this in the past. He contends that a certain gentleman said that when the rebuilding of the Guilford Lakes Golf Course was put together, that someone suggested it could actually be a profit center. Mr. Gammerman was the only one who held on to that concept. There were many of us who suggested that at the time that was not a prerequisite, that this was adding to the quality of life in the community, and there was not a need to necessarily turn a profit or even cover costs. There are a significant number of programs in this community for which we do charge, but we do not cover our costs. So it's a mindset or a thinking of what the golf course is intended to do. Is it intended to create an opportunity for a recreational activity that the town is paying for? And that's kind of the question. Yeah. In terms of the increase, we struggled as a board when the Golf Commission came in to make their presentation for their budget. We were somewhat skeptical, as I think you were, about the effect of having hired the golf pro. However, the answer to that was the golf pro really wasn't there for the full year. There was no advertising budget. He was not allowed to do several things. There were conflicts with some tournaments that were run where people did not have to pay for those tournaments because they were seasonal golfers. So there were a variety of issues that were suggested that got in the way of feeling the full effect and building building a better revenue stream, as well as starting to develop higher play, particularly among the youth of this community. So that certainly is an area that we looked at, and as a board, we made a decision to keep that pro in there for one more year to see whether or not a full year's worth of activity would actually be beneficial.
My concerns over the years have been that we have shifted the ground with the golf course from assuming that it would be a profit-making endeavor to assuming that it is a need for the community. We have the land, we have the facility. And I've always wanted to rein this in and keep it within bounds. I never argued to abolish it or prevent us from having that. I am not a golfer. I was a biker. I would have been pounding my fist if you wanted to eliminate bike trails, but always to make it a more reasonable activity. But while we're here, may we broaden the questions out a bit?
On the golf course, or?
No.
Yes.
Generally.
You want to stay on the golf course real quick?
You talking to me or to him?
Well, I was looking.
I'm okay.
You're okay? All right. If it's on the golf course, let's stay on the golf course.
Yeah, we could, maybe one more.
It's only fair, equal opportunity question to you, Matt. If you had to make some reductions requested by this board, what would you do?
Would you give me some context? How much?
No, I don't want to give you context. I want to find out what your priorities are.
The priorities, and I don't mean to be a wise ass, priorities are reflected in this budget. And I want to go back just to what we said.
No,
well, no, obviously, we presented this budget thinking this is what the town and the community needed. We did not put anything in here that we thought should or could be cut. All right? So, that doesn't mean there aren't things that can be cut, which would go against some of the things that the board believes, which is keeping capital at the levels it's at. Capital would be the most obvious place to go. All right? I don't know what numbers you're talking about. If you're talking, $100,000, it's one thing. If you're talking 300,000, it's another. If you're talking 500,000, it's catastrophic. So clearly, we would be looking at capital.
It would be. I think what we'd be looking at is more. I mean, usually the question is increments. If there were increments. So if it was, the first. I mean, this is the common questions. We all know. First 100, maybe second 100, and then we know after that. Then it starts getting more knife cutting into the bone. But
the presentation you saw the other night showed that outside of salaries and benefits, the operating budget was reduced by $287,000. In that is another $100,000 for legal. That wasn't there last year. So that means it's $387,000 in the other line items. So it's significant. Obviously, we'd start to take a look at things like maintenance and service contracts, which is sometimes penny wise and pound foolish. Supplies, I think the supplies budget this year has already been whacked pretty significantly and has been for a couple of years. We could do things like cut out the $2,200 increase in the Registrar of Voters budget request and assume that there won't be 2 primaries and 2 general elections. Social Services has $1,700 in overtime in there because their caseload demands it. And we could certainly cut that back and say, that those are some of the areas. Legal, I mentioned, is $100,000 increase this year. That's because we're in a reval year, and traditionally the first year after a reval comes out, our legal expenses go up significantly. So, maybe we take a gamble and risk some there. You mentioned the golf. We talked about the golf course. That was one of the items that I was prepared to say you could put on the table, only for you, my good friend. We're somewhat limited in a couple other areas. In IT, there's some increases for software licensing. We could maybe hope that Microsoft doesn't come and check and make sure that we're paying for all the licenses we have, but we have to do those kind of things. So clearly, capital would be a prime target, depending on the size. Now, apropos of the discussion we had a few moments ago, some of those capital items might be appropriately funded through the unassigned fund balance. We've got a pretty significant piece of equipment, a truck, that Public Works needs, and I think that's my phone going off. But we've had discussions in the past that might be a bond item. Well, maybe it's something we pay for out of the unassigned fund balance. But it puts us in that position of diminishing the amount that we are spending on an annual basis for the capital accounts. And I think the other night I was asked, where do you feel comfortable with that number? Between $1 million and $1.2 million is, we think, a pretty good number, right? Okay.
Have we renegotiated the catastrophic claims stop loss? So last year our premium went from roughly, I think it was $800,000 up to 1.3 million-ish. We did well in the prior year when it was 800 because our claims we
grossly exceeded.
We saved $800,000 or so, I think it was, in the years, and then the insurance company got us by raising the premium in the subsequent year, and this year we're way thus far. It's good for everybody involved that they're not getting hurt. But as of now, we will have paid probably a solid $700,000 more, if we went to fully self-funding. I don't think we should fully self-fund, but that account also has a $3.5 million, I believe it's $3.5 million now sitting in that account in a surplus, which is not part of the rainy day fund. So I guess my question is, what have we used for an assumption for insurance in next year, and maybe we should consider raising, I think it's over, is it 70, what is the cutoff, 150?
150.
Maybe we could reduce the premium significantly by jumping that to, say, 250, or pick a number. I'm sure the insurance company will give you the sliding scale. And in essence, we have rainy day fund money that's not in the rainy day fund to the tune of $3.5 million that can be used to, in essence, self-insure in the event we have a year where we have, significant claim activity. But it might be a way to save $300,000 or $400,000.
Right.
So I don't know the timing of when the contract comes up for renewal relative to this budget.
It's ongoing. We've already gotten the numbers, and we have committed. Have we committed yet to the contract? So the answer.
We haven't committed. We could look at that, but our consultant has basically given us this as a recommendation.
Right. And one of the things, I think, Ken, I'm not sure you were there when I had the conversation with Jonathan, it's sometimes precarious to pick one year, one bad experiential year, and base your decisions on that one alone. A 3-year
Completely agree,
average.
but the reality is our premium went up significantly.
It did.
And it seems to me that the risk reward might be there to do it. And I'm not suggesting we self-insure. We do have money in the event we're off by $500,000 or $600,000. It's.
Yeah,
you're getting it back. So I don't.
Yeah, but there we go. Yeah, there we go again about starting to use unassigned balances when we know to pay for what we should be paying today. And how long do we?
Again,
do that?
I haven't seen what the premium is and where we stand.
We can certainly
it's gone up.
We can certainly take a look at that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm going to have the answer for you before Tuesday night, but we'll certainly, if you want to define for us the parameters you'd like to see, we can certainly get with is it H.D. Seeger and get those numbers for you. Milne, that's right.
A little follow-up on the medical fund that we have in reserve that's showing a little surplus. Wasn't there sort of kind of a recommendation to keep X amount of dollars in there? I'm trying to recall. Was it a month or?
There are a couple sets you need to pieces of information. The incurred but not yet recognized is one number. The surplus, the anticipated surplus net of that is going to be close to $4 million. Typically, the finance director is asking for 2 months worth of bills. So that's roughly about about $2 million, a little over $2 million.
2.2.
So I'd suggest to you that money is in fact available for certain things.
So here we have
I would treat that just like the unassigned fund balance. Be loath to use it to offset recurring expenses. That's just one man's opinion, and I think some two.
So this kind of gives us a little bit of a dilemma, right? If we can't use these funds till we have an emergency, then they're sort of piling up, collecting dust, not going to good use for taxpayers.
I don't think anybody has said that it's only for an emergency. I think we've already been engaged in a discussion that we can use it for other purposes.
Not reoccurring cyclical costs, I think, was the terminology we were talking before.
Right.
But I don't want to do things that are foolish, and I like that you have a lead on that, and you've got some guidance on that. But I also am anxious to put the money to work for the taxpayer, so it's not just accumulating in accounts.
I know. And the challenge with doing that is to use that money for items that you know are going to reoccur over time, so that you wind up having to continue to use those types of funds to pay for it on an annual basis. It's the same dilemma we had, or it's the same situation that got us into the problem with using undesignated fund balance.
I'm just starting to wonder, though, if they're at a high surplus and we agree that they're fully funded at some amount, that maybe the surplus can be used to offset some operating costs.
And I believe that's why we're having that discussion, starting to talk about that.
Right.
Maybe.
Because we haven't, I do recall the medical fund balance not being very good, and it actually was running at a deficit when I first came on the board, and now we're where we are. So having these discussions is very healthy, and it's a good discussion to have.
Right.
So.
And if you indulge me for a minute, I understand that there were some discussions between the Board of Finance and Board of Education in using some of those funds to offset the upcoming cost for the turf field. There was
During our subcommittee.
Yeah, during your subcommittee meeting.
Right.
So, I think we're all thinking along the same lines. It's probably just going to be a matter of us getting together and figure out what's the most appropriate use and which projects,
what that number is.
which projects warrant that type of treatment.
Can we go back to golf really quickly?
Certainly.
Sure.
So, I think of the town maybe subsidizing golf to a degree, and that maybe we subsidize beachgoers, and that we do this to have a high quality of life in Guilford. And I think the marina may be holding its own, but personally it might break my heart if the marina wasn't
Marina is a separate fund.
a continuing
separate.
operation.
That's
No, I'm just saying I believe they are in the black, so to speak,
Right.
with their operations. But I do think this kind of experiment with the pro does need to be sort of thought of as an experiment. And then, like you said, at some point, if we can't show that the pro is turning the golf course around, that maybe we would eliminate some of these costs for advertising in the pro that are sort of like an experiment.
Yeah.
But I would say that the 1 year may not be enough time to.
Well, the commission seems to think that based on what they had for the partial year last year and a full year this year, that this is an evaluation year. So we had that discussion at the budget presentation, and they were clear that if it didn't work, it didn't happen this year, they themselves would not come back and ask for it. They would eliminate the position.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
There's no thought of offering the golf course to an outside source. Joe tried that.
There is. They put a bid out.
And it was disappointing.
It was, apparently, I was not part of those. That decision.
Any thought
Charlie,
of redoing that?
Yeah,
So we have to resolve it.
And that was, to the point of trying to make it an enterprise, keep it an enterprise fund or outsourcing that type of thing.
If I could for a minute, and Mr. McKenzie, who's a much better golfer than I am, would probably tell you this. The prospect of a 9-hole golf course, par 3, 9-hole golf course, being a profit center is pretty limited. Would you agree, Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And 18 holes, it's hard to make money.
18 holes even.
It's
Even
tough.
18 holes is a par 3. I think the only one in the state that's wildly successful is the one up at in Portland, right? The executive course. Oxford Greens.
No, we'd have to make money on the concession stand and in selling goods in there. I don't even know if we can get a lot more rounds in there. So that you're looking at greens fees increases. I don't know that we charge enough for out of town people.
Right.
If we're subsidizing Guilford residents, that's one thing. If we're subsidizing out of towners, that's another thing.
Right. I do know the commission is looking at changing the annual membership fee. They think that may be a little bit soft.
Mm-hmm. Another topic.
Certainly.
Interest revenue. We budgeted $70,000 for the fiscal year ending in three or 4 months. As I've indicated a number of times, we could have bought $20 million worth of T-bills any time in the last 3 months and made $75,000 more than the budget just with one $20 million purchase of T-bills. We can easily do that twice a year, specifically when we take in the bulk of our tax receipts.
Agreed.
This budget of $80,000 is unacceptable. We can get $150 without even touching the balance of the fund. So if we invest twice, T-bills are $165 right now. If we invest $20 million twice at 1.5%, and rates aren't going down, we all know that, anytime soon, right. That gets us to $150,000. 1.5% of $20 million is $300,000. You're going to do this twice. Each time you have the bulk of your receipts. We've had money. I was shocked to see. I've been asking for 6 months, and I've been asking, where's our money? Where's our money? And it appears to me that nobody for years has really known where our money is. Well, somebody did, but they didn't do a good job.
That's unfair.
Well, no, it's not unfair because we had $45 million in one bank. it's not insured, and it wasn't earning a good interest rate. That's unacceptable. It's in fact, I can't even believe that it happened. So it'd be one thing if it were earning a higher than market rate of interest, but if you're going to put money out there that's not protected, it needs to be generating a good rate of return. So again, this $80,000 is much too low. We can get 150 just out of the 20, and at any given time we have a lot more than that. We have close to 60 in January and July. That's all the monies that are out there. The tax receipts, I think the request is for $92 million in tax receipts for this year, so you're going to take in $46 million twice. So you could probably.
The problem is we don't get it all at once, Ken.
No, I know.
But
If you look at the rolling thing, you easily have. My point is, you easily have 20. I think you could probably go close to 30 twice a year. But 20 conservatively.
On how long a term?
3 months.
So what happens to the $7 million a month that we pay out?
You go through the math. There's plenty of money.
Yeah,
there.
I know. We gave you the we gave you the spreadsheets.
There's plenty of money. There's plenty of money there. 20 is a no-brainer, and then in addition to the 20, the other monies that are there, you're going to have to manage more actively if you want to get close to the 1 and change % on that. So you can get the 150 easily just by investing twice a year, which is double what you're budgeted for. And then I think you can get close to another 150 if you just take that money and sprinkle it around at places that, again, I'm glad we're working on a policy now, but you should be getting close to 1% on the balance of that, which would get you close to 300. So I think 200 is a no-brainer, and 70 is just, or 80 is, you can do that in 3 months. Just your first investment's going to get you that right out of the gate.
Right. Without us going into extensive discussion on this, we did provide you with the deposits on record for each of those months, committing $20 million in the end of August.
You're going to do it in July and in January.
You're not going to do it in July.
Well,
you're
whenever
do it in August.
The money comes in twice, so whenever it comes in, you're going to do it in July. You could have done it.
But by the time the 4 months are up,
Matt, please.
Let me finish, please. By the time the 4 months on your T-bill are up, because you're not going to be able to buy it until August, you will have $28 million in outlays, all right? We also use some of that cash for some of our bonding stuff.
20 is a no-brainer. I'd be happy to show it to you.
Okay. We'd love to.
It's a no-brainer.
Just so everyone understands, Ken had agreed when I reached out to him in December to work on this project. Mary Jane is pulled together the investment policy. We pulled together the risk parameters that the state allows us to enter into.
Have we been in violation of those parameters all these years?
I don't believe we have.
If you look at our audit, it does show that it's uncollateralized.
Right.
But had we been in any risk over and above what we were allowed to, our auditors would have been shaking down our trees. So we are within our rights to how we're doing it. Clearly, we're not protecting the money 100%, but we're doing the same thing many other towns do. We're not breaking any laws.
Okay, fine. I don't know where the money was back, in 09 or whatever, and you probably do, but if the money were there and I were sitting where you were sitting here or sitting in town hall, I would have been very worried about that money, and you don't want to lose your $40 million overnight, which is what happens.
This board actually will be the determinant of our revenue estimates. I would certainly be willing to take a look at.
That's an easy $100,000 that you can, take away from people having to pay taxes on.
Well, you're just going to revise the revenue estimates, and that's your prerogative as the Board of Finance. And I would suggest, you now have the data that on our deposits. If you could run a spread, you'll do that in about 7 minutes. Because you're good at it, and then share that with the rest of us. I'm sure everyone would be interested to look to see how it plays out. And do you need a summary of the expenditures for each of those months that go along with it? Because I don't think we provided you with that data, right?
I think I can just pull it out of one of our old Board of Finance packets.
That's good. All right.
Can I have a question here? So, I mean, it sounds like a great idea, right, to try to optimize the return we can make on this money. Right. And it sounds like you guys are actually getting into some spreadsheets and some analysis. Can you share it with the rest of the board?
It is.
They just handed it. What Matt's referring to, we just got on Tuesday night. We just got it.
Okay.
I'm the only one that read it, right?
I read it.
I looked at the number sheet. You read the policy. I looked at the numbers.
The discussion that we're having really is there's a number that is in our
So, wait a
sheets.
minute, was that the spreadsheet? Because I remember the policy,
Yes.
but I don't remember seeing any spreadsheets. $20 million invested in T-bills or anything like that.
That part, we haven't seen that analysis yet.
Okay, that's what I was referring to.
Policy went out.
Policy, I
Policy
saw.
went up, but not the spreadsheet.
Okay.
The policy on investments, we got.
Yeah.
Even I got
No,
it.
it showed where the deposits.
I got that.
Oh, right, that one. No, I know
So there's a number that basically is being indicated that it could possibly be a better number based on recent work that Ken's been doing with Mary Jane.
Okay.
So that's somewhat new to us, but only a couple months old for them.
Well, actually, I think Ken had asked this a couple times at board meetings in the past.
It's more than a couple months.
In fairness to
All right. Well,
But we are finally moving on it
Yeah.
to some level of satisfaction, I hope.
Yeah. But again, the 75,000 that we could have had just for January, February, and March could have paid for a music teacher in the elementary schools, whatever.
Should we go on to a new topic?
Well, sure. Before I forget, I just want to make sure I mention this. And actually, it was, I think, in response to one of your questions, Jonathan. We did receive a memo from the police department and I wanted to thank Chief Hutchinson and Chairman Michelet for the information regarding overtime and replacement. So we got a pretty lengthy memo here. I just wanted to thank them for that. And it's based on
I wouldn't mind
a
making a
request.
comment on that if it was okay.
Well, that's why I brought it up, because I wanted to not just thank them, but if there were any questions or comments regarding
Well,
that.
I think I want to eat crow because in our last meeting, I was a little upset because some of the overtime numbers showed a very big increase, and it had caught my attention. And I actually worked a little bit with Jeff on this. He looked at it with me, and I realized that we really had budgeted too little for 2017-18. So the year-over-year increase was a little eye-opening with double-digit. But when I really look at the 3-year averaging that he's using and the actuals for his salary costs, he's kind of right in there with a 3-year smoothing average that does seem to be definitely an appropriate forecast. So I just thought I would throw that out there because I was kind of seeing something that was a little tricky and realizing that over the long term that it was reasonable.
In your presentation, you mentioned this budget pays for the funding of 8 new firefighters and half a police officer.
Not in its entirety. I did say that it was
You did
offset
say,
by the safer group.
you said, but this is what I want to just make sure everybody's aware of. You did say it says net of the SAFER grant. The reality is that next year that I think you allocated $163,000 in cost for the firefighters this year, not including the medical costs. It's 163, not including medical, I believe.
146,000 is a number I have.
Okay, not including the medical.
Not including the medical,
or
which
the
is
benefits.
The benefit stuff is about
300?
about 48,000.
I thought it was 300.
No,
Okay.
it's 48.
In year two,
Because the benefits are also paid for by the safer grant.
I thought they weren't. They are?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. In year two, that number goes up to what, 600,000?
Year 2 is the same funding year or the fiscal year. It's two different things. Remember, we've got an overlap. We have an overlap because they start in April of this year, so there'll be 3 months in the current budget, 12 months in the next budget, but only 9 of which count for the first year of federal funding. Right. So that happens again.
Yep.
All right. So
the next year's budget, though, goes from the 148 to 600-ish, does it not?
No, it wouldn't go there.
It doesn't go that high?
Because both years are at 75%.
But ultimately,
It's the third year that they
and the third year is when we get to close to $1 million.
Right. Yes.
And we're not obligated to keep the program after the third year.
Correct.
We get to make a decision then. Somebody asked a question about whether they were going to be trained personnel up north. The 8 firefighters, just to clarify, it's not really 8, they are firefighters, but it's to man 2 EMTs, basically. There's going to be an ambulance with 2 people at all times because they're 1 day on and then 3 days off.
It's 4.
4.
And it's a paramedic. It's
But-
2 paramedics, because it's an ALS.
On call at any given time, how many of those 8 are on call, are actually up there? Are they going to be at the fire station on the pond up there?
Charlie, you want to address this, please?
Oh, is Charlie here?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Charlie. I didn't know you were here.
Charlie's taking a break.
I know you don't like it when I ask questions without you being here. So
Charlie's taking a break from beating up Eversource, and he's been doing a good job of it today.
my power came on 5 minutes before I came over.
So what's your question, Ken?
The 8 new firefighters, or EMTs, or 4 and 4, how many, is it, my understanding is
There will always be a paramedic and an EMT in North Guilford.
so
always.
two
It'd be
people
2.
at any
That's
given
right.
time. That's what I thought.
correct.
It's not 8, it's not all 8, because people keep
Correct.
asking.
We have 4 divisions, and these are having 2 additional people per division.
So 2 people up there at all times.
That's right. To
Have
provide
another-
medical coverage in North Guilford and fire protection.
I know this runs out in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Have we ever applied for a safer recruitment grant? So there are 2 types of safer programs, right? There's the one that, the new hire program, and then there's a recruitment which is geared toward hiring volunteer firefighters.
I'm very familiar with it. No.
Okay.
Again, we give you an application, you can join us anytime.
Now, I understand you're having trouble recruiting
Okay.
people, but they have the
No,
program.
Not just us, Ken. Everybody in the United States has a problem recruiting volunteers.
Okay.
Matter of fact, you have problems on your own boards and commissions to get volunteers to do them.
So, but if you could get,
Okay?
if you could
And-
get a
and
safer.
the training that's involved, Ken. Where you going, Ken? I don't know where you're going.
Ultimately, where I'm going with this is have we considered applying for a recruitment grant, which is less money than what we just got, and it is, and correct me if I make a mistake here.
We are
It's-
involved with a federal program that is a regional program, that is a retention program that's being put on by the volunteer fire chiefs. We are involved with that program.
So in theory, because there are a lot of people, I'm all for the 8, let me make it very clear that I'm all for having the 2 people up there in the north. They've paid taxes for years, they deserve it.
Uh-huh.
Perhaps we could have a volunteer program. Perhaps we could get money through SAFER or from the federal program to try to recruit volunteers. And I'm not saying that you aren't trying. And perhaps we could, with your staff down here of 8, you could have a couple of volunteers with your people here. And the theory, my thinking is the volunteers would replace those firefighters that retire. So it would somewhat
It's
reduce
wishful thinking, Ken.
reduce your reliance on full-time.
Ken, it's not practical. It's not practical.
Does Madison have a volunteer fire department?
They do.
But they
How-
don't have an advanced life support service.
I'm not suggesting that ours is,
Yeah.
that theirs is as good as, we
Yeah.
have, look,
I'm just saying it's a lot of training to do a volunteer-based program.
I'm just saying, you just a second ago said you can't get volunteers, but Madison has volunteers.
And Ken, Madison has problems getting out the calls also. Clinton has problems getting out the calls also. If you listen to the radio, you'll hear people toning out, third and final time for 20 minutes to get an ambulance out. Then they go to the next town, tone out. Again, final time, another 20 minutes goes by. Now you got a person in cardiac arrest. What is one human life worth? 8 minutes we have to get there.
My question, I'm not saying, I'm saying you're getting the 2 people up at the north end, which are going to be trained. That's good. What I'm suggesting is perhaps you could have 2 of your staff here be of a more volunteer ilk. It doesn't mean you're not getting your ambulance out. I'm not
First of
suggesting that
Ken,
at all.
This whole program with 8 people.
Anyway, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, Charlie.
Well,
you guys,
no, I have
you run a great
46
job. I'm
years of
asking.
experience
I'm
in doing
asking
it,
the
so
question. I'm asking the question about a
I
safer
know you're not
recruitment
telling me
plan.
how to do my job, okay? But let me just tell you this, Ken, okay? We couldn't exist without the volunteers, okay? The volunteers supplement the career staff. All right, we need 24 people just to do a basic house fire. We're showing up with 8. We don't have enough people showing up. So we are using volunteers. We use volunteers every day to supplement us.
May I ask a question? Do the volunteers ever become full-time?
Yes, they do. Matter of fact, they get an incentive to do that. They get 10 points in the testing process.
Okay.
We also offer a stipend.
Yeah. After a certain amount of hours, you do get a stipend if you volunteer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to give a little bit of love to the debt service. I mean, you know, town gets some and school gets some, and we received some information from Mary Jane. I couldn't help but look at the debt service, and I think we've all taken a look at the charts. And I think this is more for just the audience to, you know, just understand where we are with debt service, because we talk about it every year. A couple of years ago, we had some pretty significant hits, and they have been going down. But I think this was a little bit, you know, whenever you get a graphic chart like this, you know, it's a little bit easier to visualize it. Regarding the high school, one of the things I wanted to note, and you know, I could hold this up, and you don't have to zoom in. You know, but you know, the way this chart works is, if you see the red line, that red line indicates where we were going to be with the initial 30-year bonding. And what we did is we shortened it up, and this was something we talked about the other night, about the fact that we actually saved, I don't remember the exact number, but
24.3.
24. Oh, there it is. Yeah, estimated savings 24.3 just by doing that. When I was looking at this, I did notice that the total, there's an estimated final GHS bond of $2 million and a total existing GHS bond of 63.715. The next, I mean, really next year is the last big, actually it is the last hit that we receive or have on the high school alone. So we have one more year of the high school that it's going to basically top out, and then it's going to start its drop and its decline. And we've been talking about it for a long time, about the high school and debt service and the commitment we made. But I felt it was important to note that we've been talking about it every year, but there is an end to that incline, and it's going to start to drop as of next year. Now that's just the high school. Now, Mary Jane, did you want to? I was trying to.
Yeah.
It's better actually if you.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that although the high school maxes out next year, because of our overall debt, we max out in 2021.
Right. So
I don't want people to come back next year and say, how come you have another year?
That was my step 2.
Okay.
That was actually my step 2. I would have had you covered. I would have had your back on that one. That the high school is 1 year, but with the total amount of debt service that has already been committed and voted on and authorized, there's actually 2 more years of a rise, and then it starts to drop. Right. So at that point, after the 2 years, it is philosophically that we level out and we could incur more debt without having any increase so we have, and that's what every community ultimately wants, is to have that level out and be able to fill in the gap. That's what you want to do. Now, of course, that's what maybe some of us want to do. Maybe not all of us. Maybe we want to see it drop. But the idea is to certainly have no more increases in the debt service and have that ride. This, again, is just simply more of a PSA for the audience to know that we talk about debt service and what the increases are, and every year it increases, and we do see the high school coming
coming to a close on the increases, and that's something we know for a fact. Other debt will come as we approve it and authorize it. I want to make sure I just brought that up on the debt service.
While we're talking debt service,
sure,
I am not completely in favor of the 20 years that we're funding the school at. The school's expected life is, I would hope, 40 years, certainly 30 years. And if we had issued 30-year paper instead of 20-year paper, our burden would be roughly $1 million less per year. I appreciate the fact that we're saving 20-some-odd million dollars by using 20-year instead of 30-year, but in so doing, we are, in essence, overtaxing people now for an asset that has a much longer life. So people that move here, take the extreme again, and move here in year 20 after the school is paid for, aren't paying for the school, which should be around for an additional 20 years. So if you really wanted to spread the payment of the school out fairly over the residents of the town and over all the people that are going to go to the school, then you would have a longer maturity payment for the school. Yes, it does cost you more money in absolute dollars over the long run, but a lot of people aren't going to be here for that whole period of time, and we wouldn't have as much. We'd have more flexibility with budgets. You know, $1 million is a meaningful amount of money every year. So I appreciate all the back patting and the fact that we got a great interest rate, better than we thought, and we saved a lot of money, and that's all true. And it's certainly it's within everyone's prerogative to go to 20-year paper, but just recognize that the life of this asset is significantly longer, and we are asking current taxpayers to pay for it, and future taxpayers aren't. So maybe in 20 years, maybe it's really brilliant because in 20 years maybe we're going to need another school, and it will be nice to have this school paid off. But again, we haven't had those types of conversations as to where we think we're going to be in 10 years and 20 years from a facilities perspective. You know, we all talk about HVAC upgrades and this, that, and the other, but we've never really talked about what our school needs are going to be from an infrastructure standpoint. At least I haven't heard it 20 years from now. So, just my comment. So whether or not we've done the exercise of what it would cost to refund, I don't know.
I know that there's pros and cons to that discussion, certainly. I mean, one of the things I think about is that the burden is taken off of a lot of our kids who may decide to make this our home, and that's just one of many items that can certainly be brought up. And certainly, like I said, I think that there's two different ways of looking at it, whether it's long-term, short-term. It will provide a lot of advantages, but again, maybe in the short term it doesn't provide all that much advantage because we're feeling it now. But certainly appreciate the comment.
I just wanted to put the other side.
I know you
because
do.
I hear a lot about the money saved.
Well, there are a lot of buildings in the district, and we have one building that's about 80 years old, and that is still functioning and absorbing every student in Guilford at one point. It's an 80-year-old building.
I think you heard the chairman of the Board of Education the other night say they are not intending to build any new schools, which is why there's, $3.4 million in bonding there to continue to make viable the current Baldwin and Adams schools.
So maybe go on to a new topic?
Well, we can certainly do that if you'd like to. I just want to know what your cycle is here. Okay.
I might make one comment about the schools. I mean, we do have 7. It might not be a bad strategic plan at some point down the road to maybe have 5.
Well, I think
instead of having that many facilities.
I think we're not close to even thinking about that at this point because of the way the enrollment is trending. We know that that's not going that way. So
with our debt servicing level where it is, I think bigger project like that would probably be down the road.
Down the road.
I wanted to ask some questions about the operating budget, and the question that Mr. Gamerman threw at you about what you might be able to cut, and you said that I don't have a lot of things that are nice to have in the budget. I would have to tend to agree, trying to look at your budget. So, you know, it's fairly conservative budget. But I am wondering about some items in the budget, and you know, one that does have some higher dollar amounts would be the extra dollars for reval. And I can't say that we don't need that after reval. As you said, the legal expenses are expected to be larger as people will appeal their revals. What I'm curious about is just how you come up with the number. Do you base it on experience from the previous reval?
Are you talking about the legal number, or are you talking about reval is actually down?
I am talking about both. So I believe one actually, though, is the reval company itself charging more.
That's going
and then
down.
The other is associated with the cost for the expected claims.
The legal, right.
So I actually am looking at both of these line items.
Yeah.
But first, the costs with the reval legal work. How do you forecast
that? We forecast that on historical data, that being the number of cases that we have following revals. And we have a spreadsheet that details probably the last 4 or 5 revals.